Hello, good evening. Welcome to another Bible study with Douglas. So glad to have you with us. We are looking at Exodus 19 tonight. Before we get there, I want to remind you that you can always go to my website, douglashamp.com. There we have lots of articles, books. You can go to my bookstore, my web store if you want to get something. I put all of my stuff on YouTube. My goal is to have it out there for people to use it to grow, to study. Always be a Berean. I don't know it all, not even close. So, what you hear from me, check it against the Word. Check it against the New Testament. Check it against the Hebrew Bible, and see if it measures up. All right. If it does, great. If it doesn't, then go back with the Bible. Always feel free to throw me out if it doesn't agree with the Bible. But be fair. That's all I'd ask is go be fair and check out those verses. If it does and it challenges you, then maybe that's an area where God would have you grow. I know that God has been challenging me a lot lately. I mean, a lot. In areas that I did not expect to grow in, areas that I thought I had it kind of all figured out, and yet he allows situations to come up. And we've been looking at the children of Israel in the wilderness, how they complained a lot. They just complained a lot. There's no other way to put that. And we see that God allowed them to go through situations so that they would grow, so that they would become the people that he wanted them to be. And really, there's no other way to grow in the Lord except to go through hard times. And I wish it were not that way. I wish there was a shortcut and that we could just suddenly become mature people. But the reality is that we have to go through those hard trials, and we have to go to those places where we're truly at the end of our rope, and we think, oh my goodness, this is it. And that is when we see the Lord move. And until you get to that place where you're at the end of yourself, you probably won't see what the Lord wants you to see. I can't say always, or it always happens this way, because God does things in ways that I don't understand. But I've seen it in just my own life, that he allows me to come to the end of my rope, the end of my strength, even beyond what I think is the end of my strength. And then suddenly, oh my goodness, there's the door. Just when it seems like all hope is lost, suddenly there is that ray of hope, and the Lord comes through. So really just phenomenal what the Lord wants to do. And we see it so clearly played out in the life of the children of Israel. Remember, they've come through some pretty hard times. God has taken them miraculously out of the land of Egypt by a strong arm and an outstretched arm and a mighty hand. He has saved them. He has delivered them from their bondage so that they can be in him. And now they're going to enter into a relationship with him. And this is what we see here in Exodus 19 and 20, what we're going to look at tonight. Now, really, this is the beginning of what we call the Old Covenant. And I really hate to use that term because it's not a good term. The idea of the Old Covenant sounds like it's outdated, and there's just a lot of baggage with that term. So we're going to look at what is the covenant? What exactly happened here at Mount Sinai that was so important? And once we understand that, I believe that we'll understand the New Testament in a whole new way. This tonight is going to challenge you. I hope it challenges you, because it's been challenging for me to understand it as well. And this is something that the Lord has been working on my heart for probably about 8 months now, showing me these other ways. I really believe, as I just kind of interact with the online community. By the way, you can interact with me on Facebook if you want to. I like to put out questions and just kind of let people say what they want. And of course, I put in my 2 cents as well. But what I'm discovering is that there's a lot of prejudice against the Hebrew Bible, or the Old Testament, if you want to call it that. And there's a lot of prejudice against the Torah. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what the Torah is. And so when we take a good hard look at it, I hope that you'll be able to see some of the things that I've discovered, and that they will excite you as much as they've excited me. Well, let's get started. Let's pray, and we'll get going. Father, thank you for this evening. We ask you to guide us through this study tonight, Lord. We thank you. We pray for everyone who is watching right now. Lord, just give them peace. Help them to quiet their minds and to see what you have in your word. Lord, may you be the teacher tonight, we ask. In your name we pray. Amen. So we're in Exodus 19. In the 3rd month, after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on the same day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. For they had departed from Rephidim. You know, I think I actually read this already. Well, I'll keep going. I'm sorry. My bad. They had departed from Rephidim, had come to the wilderness of Sinai, and camped in the wilderness. So Israel camped there before the mountain, and Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself." Now that passage right there, that he bore them on eagle's wings, we don't have any record of God picking them up and carrying them to some other place. So in light of that, we have to assume that God is using a metaphor to explain how bearing them up on eagle's wings is a way to rescue them. It's a way to rescue them from the bad situation that they were in and take them to where they needed to go. We see that same phrase spoken of in Revelation chapter 12, verse 14. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and half a time in the presence of the serpent, from the presence of the serpent. So what that tells us, whether in that time Israel, it's going to be talking about Israel, whether Israel is going to somehow, be airlifted. I mean, that's one thing that I would suggest, that maybe they'd be airlifted, but I don't know. Maybe God has another way to provide for their escape from that tough place. But really, that's the main idea, is that they're going to somehow receive a supernatural escape from the trouble that they're in. Whether they fly or, whatever the technology or miracle, I don't know. But God is going to provide a way out of a very tight spot. And so God here is now reminding the children of Israel what he did. And he says, now therefore, if you will obey my voice, if you will obey my voice. Now, to obey someone in Hebrew means to listen. That's the word. It's the shamoah, or tishma'u, shamoah tishma'u, or the Hebrew word there is shama. You may know the phrase Shema Yisrael. And so Shema Yisrael is Deuteronomy 6:4, where God says, or Moses says to the children of Israel, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad." Right? So that's the Shema. That's called the Shema. And it means to listen. Now, it's just like when we talk to our children, or maybe your wife says, "Listen to your father," or you say, "Listen to your mother," right? What you're saying is obey your father or your mother. And that's really what it is. If you will obey, if you will listen to my voice. Now, this is very interesting because listening has to do with the ear. It means that you hear it and then you respond according to what you heard. And in the New Testament, we're told that in the last times, people will have want their ears to be tickled, right? So in other words, they don't want to obey what God is telling them to do. They just want to hear some nice platitudes. They want to hear an orator say nice things. Like, "You're a great person," okay? And maybe you are. But at some point, if you are a great person, then you will obey the Lord. You will listen to him. Just as you listened to your parents, I hope, when you were young, so you should listen to the Lord now, and so much more, because God has good things that he wants to give you. He has good things that he wants for you to enjoy. And when he tells you to do something, It's not like, well, go to your room because I don't like you. It's not that kind of a command. It's a command of, hey, do this, and there's a blessing in store. You may not see it immediately, but it's there. But you have to be willing to obey. First you believe, then you will see. That's the biblical model. It's not, I'll see it when I believe it. No, it's you believe it, and then you will see it. That's how the Bible works. That's how God works. And sometimes our society works that way. You do this, and then you will see the fruit, right? Every time a farmer plants a seed in the soil, he has to first believe. He has to believe that by putting that seed in the ground and then working on it and tilling the soil, watering it, pulling up the weeds, he's believing by faith that that seed is going to produce and it will be worth more than what he put into it. That is the faith that he has. And that's the kind of faith that we have to practice as well, is that we have to be willing to sow and then we will reap. And I've just been thinking about that myself, that if I will just keep sowing and I will not lose heart, I will reap in due time. If we sow and we do not lose heart, then we will reap in due time. That's what Paul said, because he's getting that idea from the Torah. These are ideas that are in the Torah. These are not something new that Paul made up, but they're here in what God himself, the creator of heaven and earth, has revealed to us. So he says, if you will indeed listen to my voice, if you will obey my voice, and keep my covenant. That's the Hebrew word there is brit. A brit is a covenant. It's a contract. It's an agreement. So if you'll do that, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. So he's now laying out a scenario. If you will do this, then it's going to be awesome. Really what he's doing, what God is doing right here, is he's proposing to Israel. He's proposing for her to be his wife. This is what the covenant is all about. And when you think about this covenant, don't think of it as a suzerain vassal relationship. Now, when I was at the Hebrew University, I heard these terms and I'm like, ooh, suzerain vassal relationship. It sounds pretty important. All that means is a king and his subjects. Some kind of a leader, a despot, whether he's good or bad, and the subjects that serve him. It's that kind of relationship. And the other ancient kings had these relationships where they would make a deal with their subjects. And as long as, I will do this as your king, you will do this as my subjects. And then they would ratify it with the shedding of blood. And then you had this holy covenant. But here, I don't want you to think of it like as a suzerain vassal relationship. I want you to think of it as a husband and wife relationship. Why do I want you to think that? Because we're going to see later in Scripture that God says that he divorces Israel. He's going to divorce the northern kingdom. And he speaks of the southern kingdom also as being an adulterous wife. Well, how can she be his wife if she never got married, right? When did Israel get married to God? Right here. It was right in this passage that they got married. And what we're going to see in the next chapter, chapter 20 through chapter 23, we're going to see a ketubah. A ketubah is a marriage contract. And unlike today, where in America, we say our vows, I promise to love you until death do us part, etc. And your wife says, and I promise to be your good wife and all this stuff until death do us part. That's a very shortened oral version of a ketubah. But in the ancient world, in the modern world, I should say, in modern Jewish tradition, you have a ketubah. And the ketubah is really, it's a written document, and it has the basic stipulations and obligations of each party, so that each person says, I swear, I vow to do this, and there are stipulations if you break that. So this is what we're going to see. And so in the Jewish tradition, there is no death until death do us part. It's until one of us breaks the contract, and then there can be divorce. Okay, so that's what happens. There is no such thing as until death do us part in the Jewish tradition, but it's until somebody is unfaithful to this contract. Now, the implication, the idea is that you will be married until you die. That's the idea. But they're basically prenuptials that if anything should happen, there's a way out, and there are consequences if something happens. So this is really what's happening. And this is really the most beautiful love affair in the Bible itself. There's a lot of romance in the Bible, right? We see Boaz and Ruth. That's a beautiful story. But this one trumps them all. This one trumps them all. It's because God himself, the great I am, Yahweh, Eheye Asher Eheye, he is the one who is marrying Israel. And he's saying, look, you're going to be my special treasure, baby, right? You're going to be my sweetheart. And I'm not going to have any other nations or any other women besides you, right? And I'm hoping that you'll do the same for me. And listen to this. Then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people. This is a term of endearment, right? Really, think about this. You are that brave knight, and you've gone to rescue the damsel in distress. You went through desert. You went over mountains. You went through dale, all right? And then finally you came to the castle. You somehow swam across the moat in your armor. And then you, with your grappling hook, you climbed up the wall. And then there was the dragon, and you slew the dragon. And then finally you took your wonderful fair maiden down, and you said, oh, you are my true love. Will you be mine? And she said, oh, yes. And you both got married. You gave vows to each other. I swear to protect you for all of my life, and I will be your wonderful wife. Okay. And that is what's happening here. God has gone and he has gotten his beloved Israel out of that dragon's lair, out of that castle prison. He's gotten her out, and now he's taken her to a secluded place in the wilderness where they can get married. This is the covenant. So if the first covenant is a marriage covenant between God and Israel, guess what's going to happen to the new covenant, the second covenant? It's going to be a renewed marriage contract between God and Israel. You see, it changes everything. What I was taught from dispensational theology, from the likes of C.I. Scofield and others, is this idea that here God is bringing Israel to the wilderness and he's going to offer them the law. And basically, Israel was kind of foolish. That's what he says. Israel was foolish to accept this. Now think about it. Here you're like Israel. Here's God. He's like on the mountain, and he's like, "If you will do what I say to do," and there's this boisterous noise and this lightning and all this stuff, and they're like, "Yeah, okay, we'll do it." They're like, "Great," and yet Scofield says, well, they were not so smart to do that. They were unwise to accept that, because what it did is they sort of they contracted themselves into having to keep the law. There's something wrong with that. That is not a good theology, but that is at the heart of dispensational theology. So there's a real problem there, and I did not realize it for years as I was in the system and I was teaching it. It just seemed like, well, that's Well, of course, that's just how the Bible is. But it's not. So when you understand that the first covenant is a marriage covenant, and really this marriage covenant, again, imagine yourself that you've now given vows to your wife, and now you're at your wedding feast. The first night of your marriage, and you're looking for your wife. Where is she? I don't know. No, you ask the other party guest, "Where's my wife?" Well, we saw her walk back that way, and you go back, and suddenly you see that she's in a corner kissing one of her old boyfriends. You're like, wait a second. I'm your husband. What are you doing? That's exactly what Israel did, is that on the night of their wedding, she was off with this old fling, Mr. Golden Calf, and having a good old time. Right? So, and that is how it went for the next 700 years. And God is patient. He says, well, I love her, I'm gonna make it work. Well, I'll just kind of overlook that. I won't look at what you just did, but sweetheart, here I am. Okay? I'm your man. I'm your God. There's nobody else. And she keeps on going after these other men and goes after these things that God says, please don't do that. Until finally God says, this has really gotten bad. Because not only has she gone off with old lovers, and that is bad enough, but then she became a prostitute, but that, even if that weren't even bad enough, she then began to pay her lovers. I mean, it's shameful enough when your lovers pay you, but it's even worse when you pay the lovers and you're a woman. Okay, I mean, that's really backwards. Okay, and yet that's what God's like, wait a second. And then imagine that you see your unfaithful wife and you see these people in the city and you're like, wait a second, where did that woman or that man get that beautiful ring? That's the ring that I gave my wife. That's the necklace that I gave her for our 10th anniversary. All these things that I see on the necks of all these people and on their fingers, and those are all the things that I gave them. So she's paying her lovers with the good things that you gave her, the things that meant something to you. Financially, it didn't make any difference, but you gave them to her because you loved her. That is what happened. And that is why God says in Hosea chapter 2, he says, all right, tell your mother that I'm no longer her God. She's no longer my people. She's no longer my wife. I will no longer have anything to do with her. Her children are no longer my children. I will not have mercy on them anymore. And yet, what happens is that God says, you know what? It's over. I'm divorcing you. In Jeremiah 3, he gives her a bill of divorce. But in Hosea chapter 2, at the same time, he says, you know what? I still love you. I'm going to find a way. I'm going to find a way for this to work out. And he sets his heart to it, to work it out, so that there can be a relationship, so there can be this renewed covenant. And that's what he works on. And we're going to see from the law that it's actually illegal for God to remarry his wife. And that is why you need a new covenant, and that explains perfectly why Jesus had to die. Okay? It explains perfectly. Go with me to Deuteronomy 24. Deuteronomy 24, when a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some uncleanness in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house. Now, this unclean thing here, in the Hebrew, it's ervat devar. All right? The word ervat is nakedness, nudity, shame, pudenda. That's an interesting word. Okay, basically, There's a implying shameful exposure, right? That's what is going on here. So when he's found that she has been shamefully exposed, when she has exposed her nakedness to someone other than her husband, then he can send her away. You see? So now notice this. He doesn't stone her, right? Because he doesn't have any proof. He doesn't caught her in the act. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff here. You see, when we spend time on this right here and just meditate on it and say, Lord, show me what's going on here, you begin to see Jesus and the woman caught in adultery, and you begin to see what happened there. That was a completely bogus setup. Where was the man? Right? Some people want to say, well, Jesus was just being all gracious and nice, and he wasn't demanding that the law be kept. Not at all. The law was kept because the law demanded that the man be present. If she was caught in the act, then where's the guy? And both of them have to be caught in the act in order for them both to be stoned. For them both to be stoned. If a man believed that his wife was unfaithful, he could then take her. He could take her to. One second, you can go outside and play. Okay, so you're allowed to. My kids. Okay, you guys can go. Anyway, sorry about that. The joy of a home fellowship. Oh well. Okay, so in order for the woman to be stoned, the man would have to be stoned as well. But if I was going to say, if a man believes that his wife is being unfaithful, he can take her to the high priest, and he will make her drink the bitter water. This is in Numbers chapter 5. And when she drinks the bitter water, she will say that I swear that I've not done anything wrong. And if I have, let my thigh waste away and my abdomen swell. And if that happened, then she was obviously guilty. If nothing happened, then she was innocent. So the law had a prescription for what to do in cases of unfaithfulness. But here we actually see that there can be some mercy. So if you believe that your wife, for some reason, you believe that she's unfaithful in a sexual way, you can write her a bill of divorce. Now this has other implications as well, because you remember that Jesus said, Matthew chapter 5, furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. Right? And now what happens is later the Pharisees say, then why did Moses give a certificate of divorce? To put her away. What we're not getting from the text is that there were two schools of thought. There was a school of Shammai and the school of Hillel. These were two famous rabbis in the first century. The school of Shammai took a more literal, more conservative approach to this. It said, no, this is only for sexual immorality. The school of Hillel said, no, if she burns your toast, because you found something in her that you don't like. Okay, they're interpreting this word here, the word ervat devar. They're saying, well, if you find something unclean in her, because she's done something that you don't like, she burned your toast or whatever, she didn't iron your socks right, you can divorce her. So what was happening is there were frivolous divorces, just like there are today. Frivolous divorces. And this is why Jesus he's not giving a new commandment. He's simply reiterating the commandment that already was. He's saying, look, no, there's only one reason that Moses gave for that, and that was because of sexual immorality. That's it. Okay, that is it. That is the one biblical reason that you can get divorced. Now look, if you're about to murder each other, maybe you shouldn't go away. Okay, I suppose divorce is better than murder. But as far as what God actually says, the reasons that you can get divorced is because of sexual immorality or sexual unfaithfulness. That's it. Okay. Well, fair enough. Look, I understand that, preserving a life in the Torah is always the highest call. Okay, that's always the highest law, if you will, preserving a life. That's why on the Shabbat, if your ox falls into a ditch, go and get it out, right? Because preserving a life, even the life of your animal, has a higher priority than just resting on the Shabbat, right? So look, if you're I want to just say this to people that are in a tight spot. If you're in a marriage where you believe that your life is in danger, leave. Okay, if you believe the life of your children is in danger, leave. Right? So preserving a life is always a higher priority than these other things. Okay, so yes, all of God's laws are important, but they don't all have the same weight. That's why Jesus talked about it's better to keep the weightier matters of the law. Right? It's great that you tithe your cumin and all this stuff. Great. But there's things that are more important than that, things that have a greater impact on the lives of people, right? So what God is saying is, why can you get divorced? Well, sexual immorality is the number one thing, right? But remember, the 10 Commandments, loving your neighbor, if you start having situations where, again, this is such a thorny issue, I don't want to get into it because there's all these, what about this situation, that situation? I'm not going to go through all the situations. I'm just telling you what the word says in relation to this. All right. If you got divorced and it was the wrong reasons, I would seek the Lord and say, Father, forgive me. Now what do I do? Okay. And read the word and see what he would have for you to do. All right. There is grace. I want you to understand that. There is grace after we blow it. Okay. There's always been grace. There has always been grace. Okay. So if you've broken this law, there's still grace. Right. So go and seek his face and enjoy that grace. But what you have here in Deuteronomy 24 is God is saying what happens. And it says, verse 2, when she's departed from his house and goes and becomes another man's wife, if the latter husband detests her and writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, or if the latter husband dies who took her as his wife, then the former husband who divorced her must not take her back to be his wife after she's been defiled, for that is an abomination before the Lord, and you shall not bring sin on the land which Yahweh your God is giving you as an inheritance. So what happens here is God marries Israel. Israel is faithful time and time and time and time and time again until finally he says, you know what? I'm going to divorce you because you've been so unfaithful. I've been very, very patient. You've been unfaithful to the utmost, and now you're killing your children all in my name. I can't handle this. And so he divorces her. But then he says, but I'm going to bring you back to me. I'm going to betroth you to myself forever. I'll betroth you to myself forever. Go with me to Hosea. Hosea chapter 2. Let's see here. Hosea chapter 2. Hosea chapter 2. God says, say to your brethren, my people, and to your sisters, mercy is shown. Bring charges against your mother. Bring charges. For she is not my wife, nor am I her husband. Let her put away her harlotries from her sight and her adulteries from between her breasts, lest I strip her naked and expose her. And we see that she doesn't. Verse 3, I will not have mercy on her children, for they are the children of harlotry. For their mother has played the harlot. She who conceived them has behaved shamefully. For she said, I will go after my lovers who give me my bread and my water, my wool and my linen, my oil and my drink. Therefore, beloved, I will hedge up your way with thorns and wall her in so that she cannot find her paths. She will chase her lovers, but she will not overtake them. Yes, she will seek them, but not find them. Then she will say, I will go and return to my first husband, for then it was better for me than now. For she did not know that I gave her grain, new wine, and oil, and multiplied her silver and gold, which they prepared for Baal. You see, all those good things that God gave her, she's thinking, oh, these all came from Baal. And she's going after these other gods. And God's like, I am your husband, your only husband. And she's been going after these. Verse 9, therefore I will return and take away my grain in its time and my new wine in its season. And I'll give back my wool and my linen given to her to cover her nakedness. Now I will uncover her lewdness in the sight of her lovers, and no one shall deliver her from my hand. You hear that lewdness? That's an inference there to Deuteronomy 24. There's the ervat devar. That's the unclean thing. God is going to expose that nakedness, that unclean thing that she has. I will also cause all her mirth to cease, etc. I will destroy her vines. Again, he goes on, and he will punish her. And then he says, verse 14, therefore, behold, I will allure her, will bring her back into the wilderness and speak comfort to her. Back into the wilderness. Do you hear that? Back into the wilderness. You see, God married Israel the first time in the wilderness. He's going to marry her again in the wilderness. Interesting. It's just kind of an interesting insight there. I will give her vineyards from there and the valley of Achor, etc. And verse 16, it shall be in that day, says Yahweh, that you will call me my husband and no longer my master. The Hebrew there is Baali, no longer Baali. You will call me Ishi, which is a more endearing term than my Lord, Baali. For I will take from her mouth the names of the Baals, and they shall be remembered by their name no more. In that day I'll make a covenant with them, a brit, hear that? With a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, and the birds of the air, and with the creeping things of the ground. Bow and sword of battle I will take from the earth. So ultimately this is looking forward to the time of the millennium. That's going to be ultimately that time there. In fact, when it says that he will allure her in the wilderness, I kind of had this thought, maybe that is a reference to where Israel, part of Israel, is going to be smart enough to get out of Jerusalem, okay, and they're going to go into what we probably believe to be Petra, I would suggest, and there they will maybe, I mean, I don't know, that's just a thought I had. So anyway, however that works, but he says, I will betroth you to me forever. Now when you betroth someone, she becomes your bride, right? Your bride. Now we talk about the church being the bride of Christ. But at the same time, dispensational theology generally teaches that Yahweh has Israel as his wife, and church and Jesus gets the church as his bride. So you're like, no, wait a second. How many gods do we serve? And how many wives are there? You know, I mean, so there's one God, there's one wife. You see, the wife that God married in Exodus 19 and 20 is the same wife that he marries at the latter times. The difference is because that relationship was foiled, it was tarnished in a big way. Because of Israel's unfaithfulness, God said, I'm divorcing you. And then he says, I'm going to bring you back. But because of Deuteronomy 24, it is illegal for God to just say, well, don't worry about all that other stuff, no big deal. No. That would be an abomination. That would pollute the land. You see, guys, God can't just say, well, I'm God. I make the rules, and I can do whatever I want. That might work in your house. Say, well, I'm the king of this house, and if I tell you do something, go do it. If I say don't do it, then don't do it. If I say do it, but then I say don't do it, I can change my mind as much as I want. That may work in your house, but sooner or later your kids will mutiny. Okay, they will mutiny. So I don't recommend you doing that. You want to be consistent. How much more should the God of all the universe be consistent? He can't just kind of keep flip-flopping on his, what he's going to do. Well, I'll just be gracious. No, I got law. I'll be gracious. I got law. No, he has to keep the law. He has to keep the law. But the beautiful thing is that he keeps the law, but in a very ingenious way. And that is, he has Jesus come and die as the husband of that relationship, so that when the husband dies, that relationship, the stipulations of that covenant die with it. Just like if you die, you're declared medically dead, you could actually get your life insurance, right? Because you're like, look, the doctor declared me dead. I happen to come back, but I'm right here. I'm officially dead. If that ever happened to me, I would definitely collect on my life insurance. And I would say, all debts that I had are now canceled because I'm officially dead. That'd be kind of fun, actually.
Yeah.
Maybe I should rack it up before I do that, But look, if you have your death certificate and you happen to come back to life after that, you're like, look, I was declared officially dead. I was dead for 30 minutes or whatever. Now I'm back. So that's the old me. Okay, this is the new me. Okay, and this is what happened. And this is what Paul gets so excited about in Romans chapter 7. Paul is beside himself with excitement because he's kind of figured it out. He's like, oh my goodness, I get it. It makes sense. And you see, what Peter says about Paul is that Paul is sometimes hard to understand because Paul has such a good understanding of the Torah that he's making these connections and he's not always spelling it out for you. He's assuming that you will also have a familiarity with the Torah. And he's going to lead you through it. But if you don't know, if you don't have that foundation of the Torah, you're not going to get Paul. And I think this is why so many churches are so confused and have these weird doctrines and have this hatred toward the law. Because they say, well, Paul was against it. He said it was nailed to the cross and all this stuff. But that is not the case. Paul was light years ahead of us. He understood it really well. We ought to understand it really well. And when you spend time in it, you're like, that's what he's talking about. I get it now. But if you just go to Paul and you start reading it, you're reading 800 level stuff, you guys, right? He's at the PhD level. And, I wouldn't expect to read a medical journal, at a high level, because I'd be like, every other word I don't understand. Okay. It's not that I'm dumb. It's just that I'm not in that field. So I don't have the background to understand all the medical terminology. Okay. If I spent time and I devoted myself like those people have, then I could read it and I say, oh yeah, I see what they're talking about. But I wouldn't expect to just open that up and say, oh yeah, it makes perfect sense. And that's the same thing with the letters of Paul. We shouldn't just say, oh, well, they're going to be easy to understand, because somehow the Holy Spirit's going to help me understand it. No, you've got to invest the time in knowing the foundation. Know what Paul was talking about. When you do that, and it's only 5 books, and it's mostly from Exodus 20, through Deuteronomy. That's what you really need to know. That's the foundation. But you might as well throw Genesis in while you're at it. It's not 5 books, you guys. You can read that in a weekend. If you're a fast reader, you can read it in a day. It's not a problem. You can do it. So I really recommend that you do it. But take your time. Take a little bit longer. So Paul says, Romans 7 verse 1, or do you not know, brethren, for I speak to those who know the law, that the law has dominion over man as long as he lives. For the woman who has a husband is bound by the law to her husband as long as he lives. But if the husband dies, she is released from the law of her husband. You see that? So then if while she marries, or if then while her husband lives, she marries another man, she'll be called an adulteress. But if her husband dies, she's free from that law, so that she is no adulteress, though she has married another man. Now, this is kind of anecdotal, but in my Bible, in the cross references, there's not a single reference to Deuteronomy 24. I find that rather disturbing. There's no cross-reference to Hosea chapter 2. Now, it doesn't mean that they have to get them all right, but in my humble opinion, that is the foundation of what Paul is talking about, Deuteronomy 24. This whole thing is about Deuteronomy 24. And that God married Israel. Israel was unfaithful, and now the husband has died. Because the husband has died, the wife, who's considered an adulteress, is released from the stigma and the consequence of an adulteress. And now she's free from that law, the law of her husband, not from the whole Torah, not from the 10 Commandments. Right? Those still stand. She's free from that law of that brit, of that covenant that she signed, saying, I swear to be your faithful wife. Now she's free from that. She's no longer considered an adulteress. That's what he says. While her husband lives, she marries another man, she'll be called an adulteress. But if her husband dies, the husband in this case is God. So if God, her husband, or Yeshua, dies, she's free from that law, not from the whole Torah. That's what people think, is they're like, oh, I'm now free from the law of Moses. No, you're not. The commandments, the 10 words that God gave are still good. They're still binding. They're absolutely binding. The 10 Commandments are binding. But now Israel is free from that law, that she is no adulteress, though she is married another man. Therefore, my brethren, you also have become dead to the law through the body of Christ, that you may be married to him who was raised from the dead, that we should bear fruit to God. What Paul is really doing here, it's phenomenal what Paul's doing. He is talking to the Jews, and he's talking to the Gentiles. Now, who are the Gentiles? The Gentiles are the nations, right? And where did Israel go? Where did God scatter Israel? To the nations. That's right. The Goyim are the nations, or they're the Gentiles. And they were scattered to the nations. And they intermarried with them. Basically, the hard part, I've been thinking about this, trying to understand it, but the best I can understand is that basically the 10 tribes were scattered to the world. They became part of the world, mingled with the world, so that there's really no telling them apart anymore, as far as I can tell. All right? I could be wrong about that, but that's as far as I can tell. That they, how can you tell the house of Dan anymore? I don't know. I suppose God could figure it out. He knows it in Revelation 7. But as far as I can tell, they've been scattered, and they've been intermingled with the world. So now he says, pardon?
What about blood?
Well, what about blood?
Isn't it possible to go trace through blood?
Well, certainly for a Jew, yeah, for someone of the house of Judah. Okay, but how do you know someone from the house of Dan or someone from the house of Issachar? We don't, right? We don't know. Certainly the house of Judah and Benjamin, those have been preserved. And Levi, okay, fair enough. Levi, okay, we got Levi's all over the place, right? Levi, we have Cohen, those are, Cohen means, means priest, okay? So if your name is Cohen, well, you're a Levite. If your name is Levi or Levi or something like that, you're a Levite, okay? So that one we know. But really, Benjamin, I'm not sure if we know that tribe. I'm not positive. Maybe they're kind of just part of Judah. But certainly, we've got all these other tribes that were like, who knows, okay? So then when Paul talks about in Ephesians, he says, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Yeshua. And he says, so that you become a fellow citizen of the commonwealth of Israel. So now, these nations that were out there, he says this in Ephesians 2:11. Therefore remember that you, once Gentiles in the flesh, who were called uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision made in the flesh by hands, that at that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. They were without hope because God sent them away. Now they're getting to come back. What does it do for me? Well, I don't know if I have any Israelite blood in me. I have no idea. But maybe I have enough. Okay, maybe I've got some. And maybe this is how God has now made, all the nations of the earth to be blessed in the seed of Abraham. We've all become part of it because it's all been intermingled through the northern tribes, the northern kingdom of Israel. They've gone out and now he's bringing them back. And then he says in Romans, and also you who know the law, talking to the Jews, that you too died in Christ, because Jesus would have died on their behalf, taking the role of adulterous wife, according to Numbers chapter 5, not divorced wife, mind you, but adulterous wife, and taking the penalty for them. I do recommend Psalm 119 Ministries. They have a good study there. I believe it's called Nailed to the Cross. And they show how that is fulfilled based on Numbers chapter 5. It's a good study. I recommend it. I really enjoyed it, so I think you will too. So what we have then is this whole scenario of where God is marrying Israel. This is a beautiful marriage covenant between God and Israel here in Exodus 19. And he says in verse 6, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. So he's going to make them a nation of Kohanim, a nation of priests. Now, I think what happened is because of transgression, God put in place the Aaronic and Levitical system of priesthood. Their opportunity was to have a whole nation of priests. And I think they forfeited that because they were not faithful. And remember that God, at this point, he's in their midst. Why do things change? Things change because they continue to sin. And as they continue to sin, there's a few times where there's an outbreak. There's a God outbreak, literally. Numbers chapter 11, it says because they were murmuring, complaining, and all this stuff, and the fire of God broke out among them, and it consumed a bunch of people. They were just turned to ash because there was always this murmuring, complaining, and bickering, and disobeying, and they would not do what God told them to do. And God's so mean and wrathful. No, he's not. He's a nuclear bomb, you guys. He's a nuclear bomb wanting to live in the midst of his people. And eventually he's like, I just got to walk away. You ever get those times, if you're a parent, sometimes, or, maybe if your work your situation, or maybe your marriage, unfortunately, sometimes you get so angry. You're like, I'm just going to remove myself from the situation for a minute, because if I don't, it's going to get ugly. Okay? And I just need to go and simmer down. And that's kind of, and it's hard because God is better than us. He's perfect. He's holy. We're not. But God has emotions as well. And, and just sometimes there's a God outbreak. There's fire from God that just breaks out. And so eventually God becomes more distant from his wife. And now there's this need for all these animal sacrifices and all this stuff. They didn't have all the animal sacrifices in the wilderness. So why did they need them later? Because of the transgression. Because they had to add this other stuff. Otherwise, it wasn't necessary. So again, it's not the 10 commandments that were given because of transgression. It was the other aspects that were added on. The addendums, if you will. It was the addendums. So God intends for Israel, the whole nation, to be special, the whole nation to be set apart, not just the Levites to be set apart, but all of Israel. So these are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. So Moses came and called for the elders of the people and laid before them all these words which Yahweh commanded him. Then all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. So Moses brought back the words of the people to Yahweh. Now again, according to C.I. Schofield, this is the beginning of the fifth dispensation, that dispensation called the law. And he says, and I quote, this dispensation extends from Sinai to Calvary, from Exodus to the cross. The history of Israel in the wilderness and in the land is one long record of the violation of the law. The testing of the nation by law ended in the judgment of the captivities, but the dispensation itself ended at the cross. Now, what he's done by saying that, what he does, and this is very sneaky, you guys. I did not pick up on it for years. But what happens by saying that the dispensation of law ended at the cross means that all the things that Jesus taught were under the dispensation of law, not grace. Okay? And so what they'll say, what a dispensationalist will say, and I used to be one, I'm not anymore. It's like, I'll just throw that out there. I'm not anymore, okay? Because I think there's very severe problems with it. Now, I'm not the other option, which is covenant theology. There are other options. See, some people want to peg you. So if you're not dispensationalist, you're like a covenant theologian. No, I'm not that either. I'm like a biblical guy, you know? And I remain open to what the Bible says without having to put a title on me. But I'm shedding the title of dispensationalist because it doesn't fit me anymore. And again, in my humble opinion, you can have yours, but in my opinion, it does not fit the Bible either. It's something that's been forced onto the Bible. But what happens here? Again, I'm quoting from C.I. Schofield. The dispensation extends from Sinai to Calvary, from Exodus to the cross. What happens there is all the things that Jesus taught. For example, the Beatitudes, Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. All of those wonderful things, he and other dispensational teachers will say, oh, all of that was for Israel under the old dispensation of law. So it does not apply to us as Christians because we're under the age of grace. We're under the dispensation of grace. That one little sentence shifts everything. So when Jesus said, I didn't come to do away with the law, I came to uphold it. People say, well, that was under the old covenant. You know, when he died, all of that became basically null and void. And now we're under a new covenant. We're under the age of grace. It's not a biblical teaching, you guys. I'm sorry to say. It may burst your bubble. It certainly burst mine. You know, as a teacher, we're sort of the pioneers, okay? We're like, you know, that just doesn't fit, all right? And this is what I was weaned on. This is the stuff that I learned, and this is the stuff I was teaching when I was at the school of ministry. I was teaching these things because it made sense. I thought, well, this is just God's plan for the ages. This is how it is, you know? And I taught dispensational teaching. I don't teach anymore. One of the biggest schools that teaches it is Dallas Theological Seminary. Okay, so think of all the people that they've put out, and they're teaching this doctrine. I do not believe it's biblical. Okay, I'm not saying that all the people that teach it are unbiblical, but in this matter, I would argue that it's an unbiblical teaching. It's something that Schofield has foisted upon the text. He's not dug it out of the text. It's not in there. It's simply placed upon it. So it says, all that Yahweh has spoken, we will do. We will do. Now, that was a good thing. When God gives you an offer that you can't refuse, don't refuse it. Okay? God's not going to be like, hey, I got this offer for you. I'll make you a deal. I'll cut you a deal. What do you say? Tell you what, for the next 1,400 years, you guys can be under law. And it's going to be tough because you're going to keep failing. But that's kind of how I designed it, because I want to create an object lesson so that when I send Yeshua, my son, and we have the age of grace, you're going to understand how cool that is. But for the next 1400 years, you guys kind of have to do all these things in order to gain my favor. And that's not what the Bible teaches. Why would God do that? If God is so wonderful and loving and kind and gracious, why is he giving Israel a bad deal? But that's what so many pastors teach. And again, I don't want to, Schofield's dead, so I can pick on him. But, some guys that are more recent, I don't want to name the names because I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, okay? Because I don't want people to throw me under the bus, okay? But we have to go back to the Word and examine it. And this is one of these places where it just doesn't make sense. It does not make sense. But as long as you're thinking that all the things that Jesus taught, that Yeshua taught, were under the old law, under the old covenant, and now we're under the new covenant, we're under that age of grace, so what, even the things that Jesus was saying, they didn't really apply to me because, he had not yet died, but now we've got this new deal. No, it's not that way. The new deal is that Israel, the unfaithful wife, gets to come back into relationship with her husband because her husband died. But not only did he die, that'd be great. Once he dies, okay, I'm free to remarry. But God's like, well, I'm going to die, but I want to remarry you. I want to remarry you, Israel. So he dies and he comes back to life. That is the essence of the new deal, right? And that is good news, because no matter how much you would say, oh, Lord, I'm sorry for what I've done, you could not come back into fellowship with God because this divorce thing happened and there was no way to come back into relationship. You say, well, God is gracious. He can just let it go. No, he can't. He's righteous. He can't just say, it's no big deal. Nobody's looking. I'm God. I can do whatever I want. It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. God is just. He's true. When you are the epitome of truth, when you are the embodiment of truth, then you're always true. There's never a lie. There's never we'll just fudge the numbers a little bit. There's never we'll just tip those scales till it kind of works out. No, you cannot do that. There is always perfect justice when you're God, because that is who you are. There's no getting around it. There's perfect justice. So to say that Israel was somehow foolish, they should not have accepted this, is not correct. Verse 9, and Yahweh said to Moses, behold, I will come to you in the thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you and believe you forever. So Moses told the words of the people to Yahweh. Then Yahweh said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day, the Lord, or the Yahweh, will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. You shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, take heed for yourselves that you do not go up to the mountain or touch its base. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. Now, notice that they had to set themselves apart and they had to wash. Remember, you're coming into the presence of Yahweh, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. He is energy. He is electricity. He is the epitome of power. He's the source of all things. Would you or would you not take precaution if you were going near a nuclear reactor? You would take precaution. Why? Because you have an intrinsic respect for that reactor. It's not because the reactor is good or bad. It's because the reactor has power that can kill you. So they had to prepare themselves. They had to wash, because they're going to come into God's presence. It's not that God's like, oh, I don't feel like talking to you because you kind of smell. Look, we all smell. I'm telling you, even when you bathe for a long time, God's like, you still kind of smell, right? Because he's God. But you have to prepare yourself to put away just that outward filth. It's literally just outward dirt that we're talking about. And when it comes to going into the temple, the people had to wash themselves in order to go into the temple. It was not so much a spiritual issue as it was just a personal hygiene issue. Remember, they weren't taking a shower every day, right? There was no indoor plumbing, you guys. So God's like, before you come in to see me, take a bath. Okay, please take a bath. And when the people would go to the temple, they had to go in what was called a mikvah. Another word for that is a baptismal. Okay, this whole idea of baptism is not something that's new with Christianity. It's not. It's something that they already were practicing. That's why they were like, oh yeah, no big deal. We get it. Because they were already doing that. It's an outward sign of it's an outward sign in a very physical, practical practice of shedding the dirt. You're getting rid of the dirt. You're taking a bath. In other words, it's kind of like, let's put it this way. If you come to Jesus, take a bath, okay? Right? But see, the first is you get to come to Jesus and then go take a bath. So that's really cool. You put your allegiance, you're pledging to him, and then go take a bath, because now that's beginning your new life in him. That's really what it's all about here. So he tells them to take a bath, tells them not to touch it because they'll be put to death. Now, whether they're going to be put to death is another matter. That's the New King James translation. The Hebrew says that they will surely die. Will surely die. So, whether it should be put to death or not, I'm not entirely positive, but I get more the impression that they'll die in some way. He goes on though. He says, "Not a hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot with an arrow. Whether man or beast, he shall not live. When the trumpet sounds long, they shall come near the mountain." All right. So either he'll die just because he's touched it, or they will actually kill him. And this is when the trumpet sounds long, they shall come near the mountain. So Moses went down from the mountain to the people and sanctified the people, and they washed their clothes. And he said to the people, "Be ready for the third day. Do not come near your wives." So again, there's that physical, there's not to be sexual contact, because there's obviously an exchange of bodily fluids. And that is part of being unclean. And there's so much misunderstanding about the laws of purity, that somehow God's against people having relations, or you got to put your wife away, or all these different things. Really what God's about, the law says that if a man has a nocturnal emission, that he's to be unclean for a day. Well, this is very practical without getting, all nasty, but it's just very practical stuff, okay? And, they just couldn't throw their clothes in the washer like we can. Right? We have so many advantages that we can keep that personal hygiene. We take a mitzvah, or a mikvah every day. Excuse me. We have a mikvah every day. We are washing ourselves in running water. I take a mikvah. I get baptized every day, sprinkled, of course. My kids are immersed, right? But it doesn't matter. It just has to be flowing water, okay? And I'm literally getting that every day. I'm so blessed. Wow, it's amazing, okay? And I'm getting to wash my clothes, as much as my wife will do them. Thank you, wife. So she does a great job. I do the dishes, by the way. Okay, so and so there's just a very practical thing here of not exchanging bodily fluids. The verse 16, "Then it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain, and the sound of the trumpet was very loud, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled." Now, I love this imagery. It's beautiful, because what we have the same trumpet blast that when Jesus speaks in Revelation, Revelation chapter 1, we've got that same voice of a trumpet, as it were, John says. He says that when he turned to see the one who was standing in the midst of the seven candlestands, that his voice was like the sound of many waters. That's one place where he talks about it. But also that his voice was like the sound of a trumpet. And that voice of the sound of a trumpet is the Lord Jesus. It's the Lord Jesus. So there's that trumpet sound. Now, not only do we find it here in the book of Revelation, not only is it in the book of Revelation, but we also find it in the book of Matthew chapter 24. Matthew 24. Now this is important for the end times because we need to spend a little bit of time on this. Really, when you think about the end times, we think about the return of Jesus. It is a repeat of, well, it's going to be the repeat of the Red Sea crossing, and also a little bit of here what happens in Mount Sinai. We've got both of these happening. So in Matthew 24, verse 29, he says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet. So where did that sound of the trumpet come from? It came from the mouth of Jesus. He speaks as though he has the voice of a trumpet. That is the kind of voice that he has. That's the quality of his voice. It's like a trumpeting sound. It's like a trumpeting sound. And then when we go to 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 16, and you compare it, it says, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, with the trumpet of God. Now there's no comma in the original where it says with the voice of the archangel and with the trumpet of God. There's no comma in the original. So in the voice of the archangel and with the trumpet of God. Who's got the trumpet of God? Jesus has the trumpet of God. When he speaks, it sounds as if it's a trumpet. That is the quality of his voice. And that's the same quality of voice that God had when he came down on Mount Sinai. It's like a trumpet. So these two passages, Matthew 24, 29 through 31, and 1 Thessalonians 4, 16 and 17, are parallel passages. They're saying exactly the same thing. They're exactly the same thing. There's no difference. We got angels coming, there's a trumpet, and there's gathering together in Matthew 24. In 1 Thessalonians 4, we've got the Lord himself coming. There is the angels are coming as well. There's a trumpet, and then people are gathered together to be with the Lord. Both of those are the exact same event. There is no distinction between them. Now the question comes up, when does this happen? Well, we don't have to guess because it tells us right here in Matthew 24, 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days. So after the tribulation, I read that as after the tribulation. That's how I would read that. I'm not sure how you would read that, but I read it after the tribulation because that's what it says. And yet, I used to read it differently. It's funny how that happens. And you talk to people about this, and somehow they just don't want to read this. They'll say, well, that's talking just to Israel. Well, wait a second. Jesus himself, he must have a pretty good inside scoop as to what's happening, what's going to happen. He tells us immediately after the tribulation, he's going to gather his people, his elect, and it's the same language we have in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Same exact language, same exact events. There's no distinction between them. Therefore, the rapture, or this gathering together, must happen immediately after the tribulation of those days. There can be no other conclusion than that. And I wonder, how did I read it differently for so many years? Because that's what I was taught. And it sure sounded good. Who doesn't want to be taken out of here before 7 years of awfulness, right? Hey, take me up, beam me up, Lord. I'm ready to go. And I lived each day in expectation today could be the day. But then I went back and I started looking for the verse. I said, there's got to be a verse. I couldn't find the verse. I asked my colleagues. I asked people at prophecy conferences, other speakers. Hey, do you know where the verse is? No. It's a mystery. And I hopped on Facebook. I got onto these pre-trib rapture conference, pre-trib rapture, whatever, forum, okay? And I said, hey guys, do you know where the verse is? They're like, there is no verse. It's a mystery. I said, well, if there's no verse and it's a mystery, then how do you know it's pre-trib?
It's a mystery to me.
Because it's a mystery. No one knows the day or the hour. I said, so how do you know? And I just heard silence. And then they banned me from their Facebook group. And I thought, it's weird. I just asked for the verse. And I got no verse. And I said, how do you know? And they said, we already showed you. And I said, well, where did you show me? And nobody will show me the verse. I looked at The End by, what's his name? Mark Hitchcock. He admits in there. There is no verse, but it's more logical. Based on what? If we don't have a verse, guess what? It's fantasy. If there's no verse, you guys, for a doctrine, it's fantasy. There's got to be a verse. A matter is established by 2 or 3 witnesses. If there are not 2 or 3 witnesses, you're making it up. It's my obligation to tell you that as a teacher. I don't like it. It makes me unpopular. Okay? I'd rather be popular and, it's really cool. All right, when we get out of here, I don't know any day now. No, he tells us, you guys. So if you've been thinking, oh, we're going to get out of here, I don't have to go through the tribulation, think again. Because until you can pony up that verse, you're believing a lie. That's what it is. It's a lie. It's fantasy. It's fantasy for grown-ups. We need to just grow up and wise up and say, show me the verse. Until you can show me the verse, you don't have a doctrine. But I can show you Matthew 24, where the Lord himself says that it will come immediately after the tribulation of those days. And we see the same gathering with angels and trumpets and all that, the same kind of stuff that's happening there as is happening in 1 Thessalonians 4:16, the exact same events that Paul's talking about. He's saying the same thing that Jesus is talking about. And why shouldn't he? He's in agreement with Jesus. He's not teaching new doctrine. He's not teaching new revelations. He's teaching the things that have already been revealed. Now that God's like, I'm going to download something cool just to Paul. No, Paul needs a second witness too. Paul is no different than any of the other disciples, right? And the disciples were all going to tell us what God had already said. So he's not making up new stuff. God's like, I'm going to give them this doctrine and they won't get it for a long time. But at the end of the age, and they'll finally start to get it. And then they'll get all excited. No, that's not what we see. It's just not what we see. So this trumpet blast, God returning, Jesus coming, of course, at the end of the days, and at the first covenant, there we see where God comes down on Mount Sinai, and he speaks, and there's this trumpet blast. It is a loud blast. We see God and not all of his glory, but some pretty amazing glory. Now it says that that God came down and the mountain was smoking. You notice when Jesus comes back, he comes back on a cloud with great glory. Now, why does he come back in a cloud? Why does he need this cloud covering? It's not your average cloud. That's the first thing to understand. It's not your average cloud. If you go with me to Psalm 97. Psalm 97, verse 2 says, clouds and darkness surround him. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. A fire goes before him and burns up his enemies round about. His lightnings like the world. Excuse me. The earth sees and trembles. The mountains melt like wax at the presence of Yahweh, at the presence of the Lord of the whole earth. So the clouds and darkness surround him. You might say, now wait a second. God is light and there is no darkness in him whatsoever. There's no shadow of turning, as one translation says. So how can there be clouds and darkness surrounding God? Because God literally has to contain his kavod. He has to contain that glory. Because if it just gets out, we're all dead. He's got to hold it in. He's holding it in. Now, when the veil goes away at the second coming, the veil between heaven and earth, and then he's gonna take away that veil. He's coming on, and the cloud's gonna dissipate, and his glory is just gonna begin to manifest throughout the entire world. And it says that the elements will melt with a fervent heat. And shortly thereafter, I don't know how many days, but it won't be long until we have the new heavens and the new earth. Because he's going to take away the veil, and then he won't need those clouds and thick darkness anymore. He won't need anything to protect us from him. He won't have to contain his glory anymore. He can just let it all out. He can let it all out. That's going to be the glory of that age, is that no more will God hold back his glory. He'll just let it out, and we'll all get to appreciate it and enjoy it. So when he comes down on Mount Sinai, now on the one hand, it's burning because it is incompatible with God. But there's also this supernatural sense that there's this smoke that God is also containing his glory so that it doesn't destroy the whole earth. And again, we see the thunderings and the lightnings. We see that in Revelation when the temple of God in heaven is opened, and it says there were lightnings, noises, and thunders, and earthquake, and great hail. That's Revelation 11:19. This is the incredible power that God embodies. This is the incredible power that he embodies and when he comes down. And so, of course, the people tremble. I would tremble too. Oh, my goodness. Wow, this is phenomenal. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet with Elohim. And they stood at the foot of the mountain. Now, Mount Sinai was completely in smoke because Yahweh descended upon it in fire. You see, God is a consuming fire. I love this passage because it shows us so incredibly who God is. God is a consuming fire. We know that a fiery stream comes out from before him. We see it in Daniel chapter 7, Ezekiel chapter 1. So many places talk about this fire of God. That is who he is. You have to understand that. He is fire. Now, he's not just a blob of fire, granted, but he's got a corporal body. It's humanoid. It looks like Adam, because Adam looks like God, where you kind of have the same shape as God, but then just put fire on it, okay? Mm-hmm. And now you have a better image, not the perfect, but a better image of God. You know, he's, what can we call him? Fireman doesn't sound right. That's to put them out. But the fire of God, is phenomenal. And we talk about, let your fire descend upon me. No, don't. Do not, Lord. I don't want your fire to fall on me. Oh, Lord, let your fire fall tonight. No, don't, please. Go to Numbers 11 if you want to see what happens when God's fire falls on you. You're toasted, like you're dead. Okay? Yeah, you're gone. You don't exist anymore. You're gone. You don't want to do that. Okay, so Lord, keep your fire to yourself for the time being. Thank you. In the age to come, when you got to give me a new body and all this stuff, yeah, let it rip. Okay? But until then, I don't want it. Because if God lets his fire fall, there's a name for that. It's called hell. All right? And that doesn't sound very good to me. So, Father, just keep your fire back for now, and we'll see it later, okay? So, the mountain is completely in smoke because Yahweh descended upon it in fire. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. Imagine if God had not come down in a cloud and contained his glory. So the whole earth would just begin to like it would melt like wax. And when the blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder, Moses spoke and God answered him by voice. Everybody heard God's voice. They all heard it. They're like, whoa, there really is a guy in there. We all heard his voice. You see, there's no excuse for what they did, for their adultery. There's no excuse. No excuse at all. And God is still patient with them. They go whoring after that golden calf. God's like, let's just start over, Moses. I'll make a great nation out of you. He could have and kept his promise to Abraham, by the way. Right? Okay, I killed off the others, but here's Moses. He's of Abraham, and it'll all work out, Yeah, it'll still work out. So he's like, we can just start over. Moses is like, no, let's not do that.
What will the neighbors say?
Yeah, what will the neighbors say? Yeah, that doesn't look good for the neighborhood. Then Yahweh came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and Yahweh called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Now, I don't know if Moses kept trekking back and up and down, Maybe he went up and he rose up. I don't know. The text doesn't say that. It's possible. And Yahweh said to Moses, go down and warn the people, lest they break through to gaze at Yahweh and many of them perish. It's kind of like, you shouldn't look at welding directly. You'll go blind, right? God's like, they should look at me. If they do, it's over. Now, I don't fully understand how he did it with Moses so that Moses didn't become a Krispy Kreme. I don't know. But somehow he worked it out, right? Somehow he worked it out. And it says, also let the priests who come near Yahweh consecrate themselves, lest Yahweh break out against them. Lest he break out against them. You see, again, it's not that God's just like, oh, I'm mad at you guys. I told you to stay there and you didn't do it, and now I'm mad at you. No, again, if you guess what happens when you play with fire? You get burned, right? You kind of play with God's fire, you get burned. Okay? You get really burned. Exactly.
Got 70 others up there.
Yeah. Is that a God burn you have? Well, yes. I need a SPF like 2 billion, It's just like, no, you can't mess around there. So, but Moses said to Yahweh, the people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, set bounds around the mountain and consecrate it. I love this. Moses is kind of talking back, He's like, well, that's okay, Lord, And Yahweh said to him, away, get down and then come up, you and Aaron with you, but do not let the priests and the people break through to come up to Yahweh, lest he break out against them. So it's kind of funny, Moses is like, well, God, you told us what to do. And, Yahweh's like, Moses, you're not getting the point here. I can see what they're doing down there, and I'm telling you to go warn them so they don't get toasted here. So Moses went down and spoke to the people and spoke to them. So, I just love the humor. It's just so beautiful what we have there. So this is just the staging for what's going to come. Now remember, God is going to speak in an audible voice the 10 commandments so that everybody hears them. And when we come to Exodus 23, actually 24, sorry. Let's see here. When they come back, they say in verse 24:3, all the words which Yahweh has said we will do. All right, so that really ends the giving of the covenant. So the covenant, you hear it's 613 laws, and it's so cumbersome. I can't believe that God would give all those things. I hear all this smack, this talk about how awful it would be to be under the 613 laws. Well, first of all, what God really gave, what they said, yes, we'll do it, we'll do everything he said, was chapter 20 through 23. That's it, you guys. I mean, that's shorter than our Constitution, okay? That is shorter than a lot of things. But how many laws do we have in America? Millions and millions. And there's like 25,000 that come out every year. Okay, and they have a measly 4 chapters of laws, which are based on 10 words. They're based on 10 words. And then they're expanded so that you understand what it looks like to love the Lord. And you understand what it looks like to love your neighbor. You understand what it means to not steal. You understand what it means to not have a false witness against your neighbor. And that is all God is pointing out. Now I hear people say, well, I'm not under the law anymore. I'm under grace. So those things don't apply to me. But that's not true. Because what happens is we say, well, now it's been written in my heart. Like, oh, really? That's funny. Then why is the church full of divorce, right? And why are there born-again Christians in jail? And why are there born-again Christians who do all kinds of things that are not pleasing in God's sight and not pleasing to your fellow man? Why? Because you're still selfish at heart. I'm still selfish at heart. It's a process. And what we need to understand is that the commandments were given for a blessing. They're given to train us how to live. When you fully have those in your heart, great. But I haven't met many Christians, myself included, who've got them all figured out, and they're so not only memorized, but they're internalized, that they're now a part of my essence. I don't have to think twice about doing the right thing because it's just automatic. I haven't met anybody like that. I'm sorry. I just haven't met these people. Where are they? Where are these Christians that are so amazing? And yet you talk to somebody about the law, they're like, oh no, that's written in my heart. I'm like, really? You had me fooled. And I probably had you fooled because I don't act like that. But when I go back to the Torah, what it does, when I go back to those 10 and then the expansion of them, it's like a mirror. Okay, it's like a mirror, and it's like I'm looking in the mirror and I'm like, oh, I'm doing it because I got it all in there. And the mirror says, The mirror says, no, actually, you're still really deficient in this area. And you're still really deficient in this area. And, I think that I love my neighbor, but it turns out I really don't. And when I say, oh, I'm loving my neighbor because Jesus told me to, without the guidance of Torah, you don't know what that actually looks like. And you are deceiving yourself. You're deceiving yourself into this notion that, well, I'm doing all the things that God's told me to do. I'm not saying this is a matter of heaven or hell or anything like that. Just, do you want to grow? Do you want to actually love the Lord as he wants to be loved? Do you want to love your neighbor as they want to be loved? In a marriage relationship, it's not just that you have sort of these general fuzzy feelings for your spouse, but are you willing to, not just take the bullet, I work hard for my wife and obviously I love her. Well, those are good qualities to have, good ethics, it's good. But when it comes to that more intimate and I don't mean the bedroom, but I mean in the sense of really getting to know your spouse. You know, that one flesh. A couple years ago, I bought either a birthday or an anniversary present for my wife, and it was to go climbing in a rock gym. I thought, you know, great, cool thing. You know, we'll have fun. You know, we'll get to know each other better. And she didn't like it, and I was really hurt. I was offended. I thought, what's wrong with my gift? You know, why does she not care for my gift? And it, you know, took me a couple years to realize, a couple years to figure it out, that the gift that I got her, though I had good intentions, I thought I was being a nice guy, I really meant well, but it turns out that I didn't know her well enough to know what she actually wanted. And I was deceiving myself thinking that this really nice gift that I thought about, I planned, and this gift that I got her was not what she wanted. So we can say, oh, I love God and I love my neighbor, and now it's written in my heart. No, it's not. You still need the tutor. You still need the manual, because the manual is going to show you in a situational circumstance what it looks like. You say, well, what does God want? If you thought about, what does God actually want? Like, well, I got to do this and this. It's not the checklist. It's knowing him and becoming his friend, so that you do those things. And after a while, you don't have to go back to the book. You're like, well, I just know, right? The couple that's been married for 60 years, they're like, I just know my wife. I just know her, and I really, we're in that same wavelength. Okay, when I bought that gift for my wife, I wasn't on the same wavelength. I thought I was. I really did. And I was offended that she didn't like my gift. And sometimes we're offended that God doesn't like it when we go to him in our way instead of his way. We say, well, he's God, you know, he should just kind of get over it, you know. But that's like expecting your spouse is to just kind of roll over every time you get him or her something that they don't like. You know, your wife's like, oh, another drill for my birthday. Thank you. You guys, there's a wonderfully funny video actually put out by JCPenney. It's got an ulterior motive, but it's called Watch Out for the Doghouse. You can watch it on YouTube. It's funny. It's about 7 minutes. It's clean. It's all good. But it's about a man who buys a gift for his wife. It's a vacuum cleaner for their anniversary. Okay. And before he realizes it, she's taken him out to the doghouse, literally. And she says, get in. He gets in and he falls through this hole, and he drops onto this big, gigantic pile of laundry. And there's all these other guys in there. And he says, where am I? And they say, you're in the doghouse. He says, well, why? He says, oh, yeah, he doesn't know why he's in here, huh? Yeah, well, we've all done something to deserve to be in the doghouse. So what'd you do for your wife? Well, I got her a gift for our anniversary. Oh, yeah, what'd you get her? I got her a vacuum cleaner. It was even dual bag. And he's like, oh, dual bag got her a vacuum cleaner for her anniversary. Yeah. So it's to start folding laundry, you know. And it's just funny. I won't tell you the whole thing. It's very funny. But what's the point? The point here is that he got something with good intentions, right? He thought that his wife would like. Did his wife want a vacuum cleaner for their anniversary? No. All right, that's the point. And of course, the point is you should buy her joy. Okay, that's what JCPenney wants you to believe. But the takeaway from that is that if we love God the way we profess to love God, then let's be interested in what he wants, not what we think he ought to want. And if we really love our neighbor as we love ourselves, then let's get to know our neighbor and say, what does my neighbor, and your neighbor could be your enemy, could be your wife, your husband, what does that person really want? That requires some effort on your part, on my part, to get to know, you know, whoever that is, and say, well, what do you actually want? Right? And I think so often we give these gifts, sometimes we do charitable donations and all this stuff, and it's like, well, Okay, that was nice, but maybe that's not what country XYZ actually wanted. We thought that's what they wanted. It's what we had to give, and we wanted to give it, and we did it. Now we feel good about ourselves because we did that.
Like it.
Yeah, they better like that, because we did this, Well,
They better say thank you.
maybe that's not what they wanted, right? So if we would stop and talk and listen and love our neighbor as we love ourselves, then yeah, we wouldn't actually need the 10 Commandments. But the reality is we don't. We don't do it. And don't tell me that you do, because I've met enough of you. And you've met me, okay? You've met me, and I've exposed, some of my failures, that I don't do it either. So that's why we have to go back and we meditate and say, wow, let me think about this, like how to love. And then, okay, we're going to see as we get into the 10 Commandments and beyond, I don't have an ox. So, and none of my neighbors have an ox. So I never see my neighbor's ox walking off. So I'll never probably have an opportunity to take my neighbor's ox back to them. So how could I actually apply that principle in my life? And that's where you meditate on it and say, okay, I don't have an ox. That's probably not going to happen in my situation. But do I have something like that? My neighbor doesn't have an ox, but he's got a dog, or he's got a car, or whatever. Something that is your neighbor's, and it's not working right. It's walking off. It's something, whether it's an animal, a machine, or whatever. And you're looking out. What it means is you're looking out for your neighbor's stuff. It says even if your enemy's ox is going off, you're going to go back. You're going to get it and take it back to your enemy. Why? Because the point is you're looking out for the needs of that other person. That's what you're doing. And ultimately, it can be summed up in this one thing: to die to yourself, to be selfless. That's what it is. So it's not that there's the old law and now the new law, there's the law and then there's grace. No, you guys, we're missing the point. We're completely missing the point. The 10 Commandments and the elaboration of those 10 Commandments are still applicable today. They're still very good. Okay? So, you can write to me and say, oh, that's ridiculous, Doug. You're trying to put us back under law. No, I'm not. We never stopped being under law, you guys. What? Well, should we sin that grace may abound, Paul says, right? Sin means to break the law. So should we break the law that grace may abound? By no means. Right? We've been set free from the consequence of having broke the law. The consequence, the handwriting of ordinances that was against me, not the Torah itself, but having broken the Torah, that was against me. That was nailed to the cross. And now that it's been nailed to the cross, should I go and break those laws again so that more grace can come? No, by no means. That'd be ridiculous. Okay, so we've been hoodwinked. That's the bottom line. We've been hoodwinked by some of our theology. Dispensational theology is a big part of that, into thinking that, that was back then. Now we're in this new era, and I don't have to do anything. No, that's not true. If we love the Lord, what does Jesus say? If you love me, then keep my commandments. That's it. Okay? Do as Jesus did. Jesus kept the Torah. Let's keep the Torah. It's good. It's fun. It's for your blessing. It's not a curse. So much misunderstanding. But if we'll take the time, we'll see that God has wonderful things in store for us. I mean, wonderful. Well, we're going to stop for the day. Let's go ahead and we'll do the blessing, the Aaronic blessing. Yevarechecha Adonai ve'yishmerecha, Ya'eh Adonai panav elecha v'yichunecha, Yisa Adonai panav elecha ve'yasem lecha shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord, I can never say it in English. Oh, it's okay. Let me just read it. I'm like all tongue-tied up. It's funny, I sang this for years and years. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you, be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. You guys, I pray that the Lord will just bless you and he will keep you. I know he will. He's good. Check me out on douglashamp.com, Facebook as well, and we can chat. Till next time, God bless.